Good afternoon. I'm the Reverend Canon Natalie Hall. I am the pastor here at Church of the Redeemer, and we are so delighted to welcome you here to this conversation this afternoon. We are delighted to know that you come from so many places across Pittsburgh, that you come from such a diversity of backgrounds for such an important conversation for right here and for right now. And as we've described in our church for some time, this is not just a conversation that's being held about a conflict or a relationship that's far, far away in a galaxy, I suppose a galaxy far, far away, light year. I don't know the reference very well. My husband could help me with that. It's not something that's happening just far, far away. But so much of what we're going to hear about this afternoon speaks to so many of the complexities of our relationships now. Of course, we're all in the middle of a very complex election cycle where many of us have sincere disagreements with our neighbors and we're still trying to figure out how to be in relationship with them. And so as we enter into this time with these excellent speakers, I hope that you consider not just what this looks like for the relationship and the project and the hope that they have, but for what that will look like for the life that we share here in Pittsburgh together. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Noor Awad from Roots.
Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to my church in Pittsburgh. Noor and I both come from the West Bank. And in the West Bank, Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs live very, very close to each other, but very far apart. Geographically, almost one on top of each other, but far apart on every level of life. You see, we speak different languages, different cultures, we have different religions, you probably knew that. We have different health systems. That means the doctor and the dentist and the hospitals completely separate there in the West Bank. Jews here and Palestinians here. Transportation systems are also separate. Buses, taxis, separate. And even on the roads, sometimes we drive in the same roads, sometimes different roads. Even when we drive in the same roads, we have different color license plates to keep us apart. Education, whether it's preschool up all the way to college there in the West Bank, is completely segregated. And of course, the two sides, Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs, live under different legal systems. I live there in the West Bank as a citizen of Israel. Full voting rights, political, civil rights, and Noor and all the Palestinians live as citizens of no country with no political and civil rights. And there we are in the exact same landmass living right next to each other. So, of course, under those circumstances, there's going to be, you guessed it, ignorance of the other side and misunderstandings, and that's an understatement, of course. Lots of resentment and bigotry and fear and hate. And there's even more bad news. You see, there's no common ground. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. I mean the ground that we're sitting and standing on, real estate. Because our lives, the places we live, are segregated. Jews in their own towns and cities and villages and settlements, and the same thing with the Palestinians. And Israeli military law dictates that Jews are not allowed to visit Palestinian areas, and Palestinians are not allowed to visit Israeli areas. Which means, had there been a crazy Jew and a crazy Palestinian who wanted to have a cup of coffee together, there's no place to do it. Until 10.5 years ago, we created the only joint Israeli-Palestinian space in the whole West Bank. We, I mean Roots. And so I said West Bank again and again and again. I'll move the slide. There's the West Bank. The West Bank is in the gray-blue. Israel proper is in the orange on the Mediterranean coast. We're focusing now on the West Bank. Roots created 10.5 years ago, the Dignity Center, Merkaz Karama, which is a combination of the two languages, Hebrew and Arabic. It's a community center. It has activities like any community center around the world, except that its purpose is to bring together enemies who've never, ever, ever met the other side. We have there activities for little kids twice a month. I'm talking about before the war, unfortunately, before October 7th. Arts and crafts, song. The kids don't know each other's language, but they can feel each other, they can hear each other, they can see each other. For middle school kids, photography workshops. For high school kids, we have a youth movement that meets twice a month. 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. Then there's alumni of the youth movement. There's women's photography workshops. There's a music therapy program. We have every month learning the other side's language and culture and religion and history. We have lots of interfaith dialogue, which is part of our emphasis. I'll talk about that at the end. When people come to the Dignity Center the first time, they're hesitant, they're afraid. You can literally see people nudging their friend who brought them. Why did you bring me here? Look at them, they're going to kill me. We begin the activity, break the ice. It doesn't take more than 1 or 2 sessions to discover that the people on the other side of the room are actually human beings. And I'll tell you the truth, that's surprising. And we're a little bit embarrassed that we're surprised, but we're still surprised. It turns out I can talk to them. The demonization I grew up with is not 100% true. But the process of humanization is not the most important thing we do and not the most difficult thing we do. The next level, which is even more important, is coming to terms with the fact that the human being on the other side of the room that you just met is the bearer of a national, political, religious identity that contradicts yours. That what she thinks about herself is very different than what I think about her. And what she thinks about me is very, very different than what I think about myself. To listen to that, to come to terms with it, and then to accept and recognize that there may be some truth in what she thinks about herself, and there may even be some truth in what she thinks about me, that's really, really challenging, that's really, really difficult, and that's what we call identity reconciliation. That comes on the foundation of the humanization of the other side. I said difficult? Yes, it's extremely difficult. To kind of illustrate the difficulty, I'll say this, that the vast majority of Israelis and the vast majority of Palestinians, especially since October 7th, are sick in the heart. And this heart disease is actually a virus that courses through our veins, and it infects us with the notion that I call the hubris of exclusivity. That's the disease, the hubris of exclusivity. And it convinces us that my people belong and your people don't. My people are legitimate and yours is fabricated. What happens in the activities of Roots in the Dignity Center, not always, not for everyone, not completely, and certainly not immediately, is a process of healing in which you move a little bit from the hubris of exclusivity to the humility of multiplicity. But it's very, very hard. Very hard. We're going to show now a short video clip from the first 1.5 to 2 years of Roots of our organization. You'll see the land, the Palestinian land that became the Dignity Center, and you'll see Ali Abu Awad, the Palestinian founder of Roots. His original intention before we founded Roots, I'll mention this in the clip, was to found a center for Palestinian nonviolence. Help! Oh, well, okay.
I'll find it.
Oh, wait. I just have to perhaps wait on this slide?
Yeah, that's the blanks in there, yeah. I think, yeah, the blank and then the video. I think, oh, no, it's a blank.
Ah, that's it. Okay.
Back to the slideshow. Okay. You want the video now?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Here we go. Should have it cached. That's connected. Awesome. Nope.
נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי. כשבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות, אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין,
I'm pull it back, see if it pulls in a better quality.
נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי. כשבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות, אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין, השמאל לא יעשה שלום.
The first time I had heard someone talk about being in Israeli jail, someone talking about suffering under occupation.
זה שאני מכבד אותך, זה הכבוד שאני מכבד את עצמי כשאני מסתכל על עצמי בראי.
We believe that religion has to be part of the solution.
Allahu Akbar. Adonai hu Elohim.
יהודים ניצודים בארץ ישראל כמו חיות, ממש. פשוט צדים אותם. צדים אותם. רואים רכב, איפה הם? איפה השותף? איפה האח?
אתה יושב על הכלכלה שלי, אתה יושב על הבית שלי, אתה יושב על הלב שלי, אבל לא כשותף.
האם אתה מוכן להודות שהישיבה שלך פה היא ישיבה של פשע? וממילא תגיד לי מבחינה פוליטית.
The Jewish people, that we own this land? We don't own this land. We belong to this land. And the Palestinian people also belong to this land.
אנחנו האחרונים בעולם שצריך לשבת אחד עם השני. באתי לבקש לדרוש איתם מחדלים, מפני שאת ואני סבלנו שלא חיפשנו את זה לפני.
I have often used 3 labels to describe myself. Number 1, I'm a Jew. Number 2, I'm a Zionist. Number 3, I'm a settler. 2 minutes for each of those 3 labels. When I say I'm a Jew, I'm not talking about religion. I'm a religious Jew, but Jew comes before religious. What do I mean when I say I'm a Jew? We Jews are an extended family. We're a people, the people of Israel. We began with Abram and Sarah, chapter 12 of Genesis. That was 3,000 years ago. They had children, their children had children. They became a clan, and then a tribe, and then the 12 tribes of Israel. And all Jews today, on some level, in some sense, see themselves connected with all the Jews of the past and the present, and certainly with all the Jews who are on earth today. And that sense of connection exists not only between all the Jewish people in all the ages, it also exists between the Jewish people and the land of the Jewish people, between the people of Israel and the people of Israel and the land of Israel. Because of the connection between the people and the land that's been true since our inception, since our birth, I can, from my perspective, move seamlessly from talking about myself as a Jew to talking about myself as a Zionist. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, whose aim was and is to return the Jewish people home to the land of Israel. 2,000 years ago, 70 of the Common Era, only a few decades after the death of Jesus, the Romans destroyed the second Jewish Commonwealth. Our kings, our priests, our leaders, rabbis, and of course our common people were killed or sent into exile. First in the Middle East, then Northern Africa, then we moved up to Europe, many years later to Australia and America. And during all these 2 millennia, the Jewish people around the world know that they are in exile. Until about 150 years ago, every Jew felt he wasn't at home. He or she is in limbo, waiting, hoping, praying, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, to come back home to our ancient homeland. The Zionist movement brought home over 3 million Jews from around the world, and one of them is standing right here in front of you now. I was born not in Pittsburgh, I was born in New York. When I was 18, I got on the plane, I made Aliyah, which means I made the ascension to the land, and I closed the circle, I fulfilled the dreams of my great-great-great-great-grandmother and great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. They had hoped to come home someday, and I merited to fulfill those hopes. A great sense of fulfillment, of closing the circle, of coming home to where I belong. After I said I'm a Jew, and after I said I'm a Zionist, I said I'm a settler, which means I'm an Israeli Jew who does not live in Israel proper, the light orange on the map, but rather moved over the dotted line, which is called the green line, into the West Bank, the area in blue-gray. The West Bank, from 1948 to 1967, was under the occupation of Jordan. In 1967, in what we Israelis call the Six-Day War, we conquered the West Bank, and then the governments of Israel began to allow Israeli Jews to enter and settle in the West Bank. I've been in the West Bank since 1979. My children were born there. My grandchildren were born there. I know that living in the West Bank and calling myself a settler raises serious political questions. It may sound to some people listening right now that I am making a radical, dangerous political statement by living there. I get that, and I'll refer back to that at the end of my talk, but for now I want to say that I didn't move there for political reasons. I moved there for historical reasons. And the historical reasons are the following. If I've come home, as I have, after 2,000 years of exile, then I want to come home to the center of my homeland. I want to come home to the cradle of Jewish civilization. I want to come home to where it all began. And where were the Jewish people born? They were born in what today is called the West Bank. The book of Genesis is about life in the West Bank. So is the book of Joshua. So is the book of Judges. So are the books of Kings, and also all the prophets. They prophesied in the West Bank. During the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived in our land, we almost never made it to the coast. Not to Tel Aviv, not to Haifa, not to Ashdod. We lived in the Central Mountain Range. That's where we have our archaeology. That's where you can walk outside and scratch the ground with your heel, come up with piece of pottery that our ancestors left over 2 millennia ago, and that pottery speaks to me. It exemplifies the chain of tradition, the connection to the past and to the land. For the same reason that I live in the West Bank, for history, for connection, I also usually don't call it the West Bank. I call it Judea and Samaria, Judah v'Shomron. And I call it that not in order to make a political statement, but again to make a historical statement. Because Judah and Samaria is what the Jewish people have called the West Bank for the past 2,500 years. I call it what history has called it. Samaria is the land above Jerusalem to the north. The kingdom of the 10 tribes was called Samaria. And the kingdom below Jerusalem to the north was called the kingdom of the tribe of Judah. In other words, Judea. So I call it what I call it because of the chain of tradition, for the same reason that I live there. And it's a deep sense of closing the circle after 2,000 years of exile. And then, 10.5 years ago, I began to realize that in a certain sense, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And I don't mean that everything I just said was a lie. But I do mean that everything I just said was a half-truth. A half-truth that for my whole life I thought was the whole truth, the only truth. You see, for over 33 years, I'd lived in Judea and Samaria, and I'd never, ever really met a Palestinian. They didn't exist for me. I was blind, or they were transparent. They were like the gray drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, my movie, the Jewish movie, and they're not part of the plot. You can safely ignore them. And we Jews all do. We all do ignore them. My Jewish education, my Zionist education, didn't leave room to see them. Didn't leave room to see them. I lived in a one-story reality, as if there's only one truth, one story in that land. And as I began to meet my Palestinian neighbors 10.5 years ago, it began to dawn on me that I live in a two-story reality. There are two truths there. And I believe that if you mistake half of the truth for the whole truth, if you mistake one of the stories for the whole of the two stories, then you're pretty close to falsehood. And that's not a place that I want to be any longer. 10.5 years ago, I'm driving in my car where I live in Judea, south of Jerusalem. The area is called by us Israelis Gush Etzion. The settlement I live in is called Alon Shvut. I had with me in the car 2 evangelical pastors from the U.S. here. They were old friends of mine. And they, of course, believe in the same Bible that we Jews believe in. They read and they know and they believe in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Zechariah, all the other prophets. And they had read the prophecies that after a long, hard exile of many, many years, the Israelites, the daughters and sons of the land, would return. And they knew, like I knew, that it was coming true right now. They wanted to hold on to me and feel the return. They wanted me to show it to them. So I drove them around. I showed them the roads we paved and the forests we planted, the houses, the buildings, the institutions that we've constructed. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker from the side of the road. After a few minutes of driving, picked up another hitchhiker. And then the 2 young men asked to get out of the car. I stopped. When we started to drive again, one of the pastors sitting next to me in the car, Bob Roberts from outside of Dallas, Texas, he said to me the following words: Hanan, that was great. You just picked up hitchhikers. You taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. No one does that in Texas. Thank you very much, he said. So I said to Bob, you know, it's not just me. Around here, we all pick up hitchhikers. We have a common vision. We trust each other. And just like everyone else, I said, I do my very best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to Bob and Kevin, and even worse, I was lying to myself. I really believed what I said, that I tried to pick up every person. But it was not true. What I should have said is I tried to pick up every Jew. I'd never picked up a Palestinian in my life, and I literally did not know that I never picked up a Palestinian in my life until that moment, which means that either I didn't see the Palestinians or I didn't see them as human beings. And it became like a moment of confession in front of my two pastor friends. I felt exposed. I felt naked. I had revealed my sin, my blemish, my prejudice, my racism. And I said to the two pastors, there's something wrong with me and I'm going to find a way to fix it. I'm going to find a way to turn the Palestinians into human beings in my eyes, and the way I'm going to do it is to meet them. It wasn't easy. My journey began. We're going to skip forward a few days or weeks or months, I'm not sure. It's now the last Wednesday of January 2014. I'm sitting in my living room, and I have a meeting scheduled with my Palestinian neighbors in another few minutes. I have a map of where to go. So I get up from the sofa I'm sitting in my home, walk to the front door a few steps, put one foot over the threshold after opening the door, and my wife calls behind me, where are you going? So I said, I'm going to meet Palestinians. And that's when all hell broke loose. So she started to scream, what do you mean meet Palestinians? They'll kill you. And I came back in, and I approached my wife. I saw the absolute terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. I told her I had to do this. I walked out the front door. When I closed the door behind me, I remember saying to myself, perhaps my wife is right. Perhaps they will kill me. And I was really afraid. My heart was pounding. I still remember the feeling. I walked, didn't take the car. It was about a 25-minute walk. And I found myself approaching a piece of Palestinian farmland surrounded by a stone fence. I walked in the gate, and I came into the land that you saw in the film. There was no buildings there, and just a few trees, but I saw something that I'd never ever seen before. You could call it a miracle. I saw 15 Israelis, some of them my neighbors, and 15 Palestinians doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other, and that I'd never seen before. So they're in little groups. There's 2 over here and 3 over here, perhaps 4 over there. And then I saw a Palestinian woman standing right in front of me who's alone. She's dressed in brown from head to toe. Only her face is visible, clearly an observant Muslim. I walked right up to her and I said hello in English. She said hello back to me, talked for about a minute. Then I said to her, I can't believe that I'm talking to you. And she responded, I can't believe that I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers. I had no idea why she said she doesn't talk to Israeli settlers. In any case, she's talking to me. The conversation didn't go on for a long time because her son walked over and she wanted to introduce me. She told me his name is Yazin. He's 17 years old. Yazin and I shook hands. We started to talk. And immediately I saw that Yazin was wearing a jacket. And on the jacket were 3 words in the English language. Seeds of peace. Seeds of peace. Who knows what seeds of peace is by a show of hands? Okay, about 7, 8 people. 9, 10. Don't tell your neighbors what it is because I want to keep the suspense here. So, I look at the jacket, it has the word peace on it. And I look at Yazin, he's a Palestinian. And I say to myself, this can't be. Why would a Palestinian wear a jacket with the word peace on it? They don't know anything about peace. So, half jokingly, I said to Yazin, what's this seeds of peace thing? I thought he's going to say, I don't know, someone gave me the jacket. What does it matter? That's not what he said. He said it's the name of a summer camp, Seeds of Peace in Maine, USA. And the camp takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. Yazin told me he spent the past summer in the camp. He had a great time there. He met Israeli kids. They're friends on Facebook now, he said. And he told me that he was so affected by meeting Israelis that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our 2 peoples. And I'm listening to Yazin and not knowing if I can believe what he's saying, because it contradicts everything that I know to be true. And you could say that Sadia, his mother, and Yazin were the first 2 Palestinians that began the process of deeply unsettling me. His father walks over, Sadia's husband. Jamal's a stocky guy, only a tiny bit taller than I. After shaking hands, he says, "Where are you from, Hanan?" I said, "I'm from Alon Shvut." "Where are you from?" I said to him, and he said, "Beit Umar." He said those two words, Beit Umar, and I had half of a heart attack. Because I know Beit Umar, it's a Palestinian city, 24,000 Palestinians on the main road from my home going south towards Hebron, towards Beersheba, towards the Cave of the Patriarchs, Marat Machpelah. I used to live right in that area. And I've driven on the road hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. Once I was ambushed in the middle of the night. Another time, middle of the day, my wife and kids are in the car. The rocks are coming from this side and from that side, and the windshield is breaking. The car is shaking. Everyone is screaming. So I know the people in Beit Umar, they're dangerous terrorists. And now it turns out that I'm talking to this family, so it wasn't the easiest thing in the world for me. Jamal starts telling me how he came to this gathering of Israelis and Palestinians. He said, "Hanan, you know, there's no Jews in Beit Umar, okay? But there are the Jewish soldiers who guard the entrance to the city, and we hate them because they make life miserable for us. They persecute us. We hate them, and since they're the only Jews we know, by extension, we hate all Jews. No one in Beit Umar would want to have a social meeting with a Jew." But he told me a long time ago he had a friend from the city of Jericho, and the friend said, "Why don't you come along with me? I go to dialogue sessions between Israeli Jews and Palestinians in my city. Come along." And Jamal said to me, "I told my friend I'll never ever come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. A proud Palestinian does not go to meet the enemy." But the friend wouldn't take no for an answer. And after the course of months of trying to convince him, Jamal, "Okay, I'll tag along." They sat in a room in Jericho, in a circle. Jamal said, "I didn't participate. I sat in the corner, but I listened." He said that at one point after the main discussion, one of the Israeli Jewish men got up from his chair and looked at him, looked at Jamal. And he got really uptight. "Why is he looking at me like that?" And he started to walk towards me. "I was really afraid what he's going to do," Jamal said. And he came right up to me and forced me to shake his hand. I had no choice. And then he asked me questions. I had no choice but to answer the questions. A very, very unpleasant conversation. And when the guy finally walked away, Jamal said, I wiped the sweat off my brow and I ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off my hand from touching a Jew, and I vowed never to come back to this cursed place. Jamal went home and told his wife about the terrible experience he had there. And she agreed that he shouldn't have ever gone there. What has to happen now is never go back and never tell anyone in Beit Umar that he was there. But Jamal's friend had other plans. And Jamal didn't explain to me how this happened, but the next month, his wife and him found themselves back in that circle. And the month after, and the month after, they became part of that group. And Jamal told me, where I thought there was only an enemy, I discovered a human being who turned out to be a partner, and that changed me. And I am listening to Jamal with the same sense I had when I was listening to his son. I don't know if I can believe what he's saying. And I'm getting more and more confused and challenged. Wow, how could this be? Jamal, he looks so Palestinian. He's become a peace activist. Jamal tells me another story. He says, "Hanan, you know, there's lots of little kids in Beit Umar. Okay? 5 years old, 6 years old. He said, when those kids see someone who looks like you, Hanan, they start to cry." I said, "Why do they start to cry?" And he didn't understand why I don't understand. He got flustered. He said, "Hanan, you don't get it?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "It's the kippah you have on your head and the beard and those things hanging from your pants because so many people dressed like you, they walk into Beit Umar with their submachine guns and they kill the kids." I thought that was a blood libel. Parenthetically, I'll tell you that today it's actually true. Back then, I thought it was borderline anti-Semitism. He doesn't know what he's talking about. We don't do things like that. I have to tell him off. And I'm getting more and more full of rage inside. But before I burst out in anger, I realized that this is a moment of blessing. For the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And that can be a blessing if I'm able to hold the experience and not lash out in rage. I have to hold it and process it. And I did hold myself back, trying to figure this out. It felt like an eternity was passing. What am I going to say to him? And then I have a vision of my grown sons and my son-in-law walking in the fields around our house, family outing, with their wives and with their children, my grandchildren. And in my mind's eye, I see that the three young fathers, like all the other Jewish young men of that age where I come from, are all carrying pistols. And then it dawned on me that those guns must be frightening to little Palestinian kids. So I said, Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he responded and said, no, you can't be afraid of us. It doesn't make any sense because we're afraid of you. And I was so confused. They're really afraid of us? Why should they be afraid of us? We're peace-loving people. We don't use those guns. They're just for self-defense. And I'm getting very, very undone. I don't understand what's happening around me. Everything I heard from Jamal and his wife and Yazin. Later that afternoon, we sat in a circle, the Israelis and the Palestinians. The sun's going down. We're outside. There's no roof. And Ali Abu Awad, who you saw in the film, who's the owner of the land we were convening on and the Palestinian convener of that get-together, Ali Abu Awad got up to talk to us in the circle in perfect Hebrew that it turns out he learned for many years in Israeli jail. And he said, my name is Ali Abu Awad. I'm from a proud Palestinian family. For generations we lived in Kubeba. And I said to myself, what's Kubeba? Never heard of it. He said that in 1948, during the war, the people, his clan from Kubeba were forced out by the Jews. He said that the Jews later turned Kubeba into Lachish, and I know where Lachish is. It's a half-hour drive from my house towards the Mediterranean. He said that the clan was scattered. Some went to Europe, most went to Jordan, and a large number, he said, went to Beit Umar. And that's where he was born and grew up. And Ali starts to tell us about what life is like in Beit Umar, about him growing up. He said that they lived under the rigors and the suffering of the Israeli occupation. Israeli occupation? That was the first time in my life that I heard someone in my presence use those two words. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Because, of course, I had read in the newspaper thousands of times about the Israeli occupation. And I'd heard in the newspaper, I heard in the radio that the United Nations and the UN, the European Union, is always condemning the Israeli occupation. But I'd never stopped to think where this could be. I didn't see it. Because when I drive on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? Where's the occupation? And Ali's talking about living under military control of the Israeli army, my army, with no civil rights. He's talking about oppression. He's talking about fighting non-violently for Palestinian liberation. I'm saying to myself, Palestinian liberation? What's Palestine? Where's Palestine? I don't know what he's talking about. And he said that during the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, his mother was a leader, giving out pamphlets, organizing strikes. He said the Israeli soldiers, which means my soldiers, came into his house the middle of the night and beat her up, threatened her. A second time they came back. The third time, he said, they took her to jail for 6 years. And then he said he grew up another year or two, and he was thrown into jail and sentenced to 10 years, and never told the charges in the secret file against him. And we'll get up and say, Ali, you're a liar. We don't do things like that. You're making it up. But I didn't get up to tell him he's a liar, because he was clearly not trying to convince us of anything. It wasn't a political speech. He was telling the story of his life very, very calmly. And I went home that day more confused and challenged than I've ever been in my life. I remember that days passed. I'm trying to figure out what I heard there. Could it be true? I'm pacing back and forth in my study, getting so nauseous that I have to bend down and pick up my stomach and put it back in. Everything's churning inside. How am I going to figure this out? So I went back to the same place that we had that gathering, and Ali was there. There was another Israeli, Shaul Yudelman. We started to talk to Ali, and then Jamal came. We were 2 Israelis and 2 Palestinians, and then 3 and 3. Next week, 5 and 5. The weeks became months. We were 10 and 10. The months became years. We were 15 and 15. And almost once a week, for a long, long time, we sat into the wee hours of the night around the campfire in the winter and in the summer. What we did can be described in one word: stories. We told stories. The Palestinians told us the stories of who they are, their history, their identity, their belonging to the land, their suffering, and their aspirations. And it was very, very hard for us Israeli Jews to listen, because their stories contradict our stories. And we Israeli Jews told the Palestinians the stories of our 3,000-year-old connection to the land. 1,000 years in the land, 2,000 years outside of the land in exile, and then in our generation coming home to the land of Israel through the Zionist movement. And the Palestinians hearing our narrative was like a dagger to their hearts. It was very, very hard for them to listen. Both sides' stories contradict the other. And so many times the Israelis and the Palestinians wanted to get up and leave, to run away. How can you listen to this terrible nonsense again and again and again? And you feel you want to get up and scream and tell them they're wrong. You feel like you're a traitor for listening. A traitor for listening. But we listened until it hurt. And then we listened some more. It wasn't dialogue. It was hearing stories, going home and trying to figure out how could that be? Could there be any truth in it? Coming back and asking questions, and then having the chance to tell your own story. Very, very hard. Here are some of the things we learned in over 10 and a half years of non-dialogue. Ali told us, Ali Awad, almost from the outset, that indeed, Palestinians by and large go to sleep at night dreaming that the Israeli Jews will disappear from the land tomorrow. Because the Palestinians know that the Israelis don't belong. The Palestinians know the story of the French in Algeria. The French were thrown out by the indigenous Algerian people. The French were just colonialists who didn't belong. And the Palestinians say, eventually the Jews will get the message, if we Palestinians fight long and hard enough, that they don't belong, and they'll leave. It was very, very hard for us Jews to hear Ali admit that that's what most Palestinians think. But you know what? We Jews had to admit that we go to sleep at night with the same dream that the Palestinians will eventually disappear from the land, because we know they don't belong. And we'll fight hard enough, make it difficult enough for them, and they'll leave. It'll take 5 years, 50 years, 100 years. Eventually we'll be here without them. The Palestinians said to us Jews, but we have no other place to go. And we Jews said to the Palestinians that we have no other place to go. So what happens when you hear the other stories of belonging to the land, of peoplehood, of identity again and again and again? You realize that indeed they're not going anywhere. They're not going to leave. We won't be here eventually without them. Both sides are doomed or destined to live in that land together, either killing each other or in some type of peace, but there's no other way. And that fries your brain, because you now have to reconfigure everything you know or think you know about the past, the present, and the future. You realize you've been living in illusion. Eventually we will be here without them, and it's not going to happen. And that reconfiguration of understanding is very, very difficult. You have to overcome the hubris of exclusivity. We also learned that most Israelis and most Palestinians construct their identities upon the erasure of the other side's identity. Both sides are very certain that they can tell the other side who they are. You know what the Israeli Jews say to the Palestinians? They say, Palestinian, you know it's a made-up identity. It's a fabrication. There's no such thing. Never was a Palestinian state. You're just Arabs. So go back to Saudi Arabia where we came from. Why did you come to take our land? And what did the Israeli Jews, and what did the Palestinians say about the Jewish Israelis? They say, Jew, good. The Quran greatly respects Judaism, but it's a faith. It's a religion. It's not a people, not a nation. You don't need land. So go back to Russia where you came from. Why did you come to take our land? But after you listen to the other side's stories again and again and again, you realize you know nothing about who they are. You can't tell them who they are. You have to listen and let them tell who they are, and they may listen when you tell who you are. Now I'm going to be very, very specific about what we've learned. 4 points. The first 3 lead up to the last point, the 4th point. I hope you're ready. Point number 1. There is such a thing as the Palestinian people. That's very hard for Israelis to wrap their minds around. And this point has a corollary. There is such a thing as the Jewish people. That's very hard for the Palestinians to wrap their minds around. Point number 2. There is such a thing as the land of Palestine. That's very hard for Israelis to accept. Corollary, there is such a thing as the historical land of Israel. That's very hard for Palestinians to accept. Point number 3, the Palestinian people are deeply connected to the land of Palestine. And you guessed the corollary, the Jewish people are deeply connected to the land of Israel. Point number 4, the most excruciatingly difficult point of all. The historical boundaries of the land of Palestine and the historical boundaries of the land of Israel are more or less the same boundaries. From the river to the sea, that is, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, is all historical Palestine. And from that same Mediterranean Sea to that same Jordan River is all the historic land of Israel. That's not politics yet. That's identity and history. The land between the river and the sea has 2 identities. At one and the same time, that land is Israel and that land is Palestine. To say it differently, the Holy Land, Mother Earth, has given birth to 2 children, to 2 siblings, the Jews and the Palestinians. They are both children of the land. They are fighting over who is the real child of that mother. And here we are in Roots proclaiming today that that mother has 2 children who both have equal rights to be nurtured by the mother that gave birth to them. That's very, very difficult for Jews and Palestinians to accept. I'm going to close with 3 other points, very practical points. The first point is about the settlers. The settlers in the West Bank are seen by many people and many politicians and many peace movements as part of the problem. And many, many peace movements say that if the settlers are part of the problem, then we have to ignore them. That doesn't help. In Roots we say, and we're just about the only organization going this direction, that if the settlers are part of the problem, then they have to be part of the solution. You have to talk to them. Our movement is focused, Roots is focused exclusively in the West Bank. That's where we do the work, where the settlers are. The heart of the problem has to become the heart of the solution. That's number 1. Number 2 is religion. Religion is part of the problem. That means that Judaism is part of the problem and Islam is part of the problem. The Christians are off the hook for now, by the way. So it's good to talk in a church. And if religion is part of the problem, then we in Roots say then religion has to become part of the solution. As opposed, unfortunately, from most of the secular and political peace movement of the past 40, 50 years that says religion is part of the problem, so we better ignore it, better sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away. It's not going away. The people of the Middle East, the people of Israel, Palestine, are traditional people becoming more and more traditional. And therefore, Roots focuses on religion, on Islam and on Judaism. Interfaith dialogue is a central part of what we do. And interfaith dialogue, by us, does not mean love your neighbor as yourself. That doesn't help. That doesn't work. We focus on the difficult texts. We focus on the evil texts in Islam and in Judaism, there are many, many texts. Judaism has a wide variety, and so does Islam. In Judaism, there are texts that we could say used to be in the background, that they've been brought to the mainstream in the past decades, texts that tell us to throw out the Palestinians and that bring us to kill them. Those texts are put on the table. And the same thing on the Islamic side. We have to own our texts, our bad texts, our evil texts. We have to take responsibility for them, and then we have to repent for them. Then we have to find the ways to reinterpret them or to put them back in the background, to bring to fore the text will allow us to live together. The third point, after settlers and after religion, is settlements. You heard me say that Roots respects and cherishes the Palestinian connection to the whole land from the river to the sea, and that means that we believe that Palestinians should have the right to live in the whole land, from the river to the sea, whether it's the blue or it's the orange. Israel proper, there also Palestinians should have the right to live wherever they want. And conversely, you heard me say that Roots greatly respects and cherishes the Jewish connection to the whole land from the river to the sea, whether it's Israel proper or whether it's the West Bank. And Jews have the right to live everywhere, including in the West Bank, but not at the expense of the Palestinian people. And the settlement movement that I've been part of for many decades is absolutely claiming the land and the resources for my people, the Jewish people, at the expense of the Palestinians. The settlement movement has trampled on the rights of the Palestinian people. So we believe, yes, the Jews have the right to settle in the West Bank, but only after the Palestinians have the exact same rights to build, the same rights to move, the same civil and legal and political rights. Occupation is an evil. It's not the only problem there in the Middle East, but it's a major part of the problem. And Roots is working to open the eyes of the Israeli settlers like me to see the reality of what we have done to them, to see the power balance, to see the injustices of the way we are practicing. We Jews are practicing our identities. Last sentence. In Roots, we are establishing the human groundwork for a future political peace settlement of dignity, of equality, of freedom, human rights, and security for both peoples in that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not allowing you to show the video. Okay. No, the quality will be bad, so it's no point of watching a 5 minutes video.
I've got a fix for that.
It's okay, it's okay. I think we are here. The people will, need to hear from us and not to see a video. You can watch the video later. We can send you the video. And if you are wondering why the rabbi talked first and I didn't talk first, that's because the rabbi liked to talk much more than I actually like to talk. Okay. Okay, so my name is Noor Awad, and I want to share with you my story and what we are doing, what I am part of, what we are trying to achieve. So before I tell you what Roots is about, I also want to tell you who I am, where I came from. So here's my story. I was born I was born in Amman, Jordan in 1991. I live in Bethlehem in the West Bank today, but I was born in Jordan. Now, I'm not Jordanian in any sense, in any meaning, in any way. Why was I born in Jordan in 1991? We have to go back to 1948. In 1948, my family, my grandparents, my extended family, you can say the Holy Clan, we used to live in a village southwest of Jerusalem. For many, many generations, as long as I can count, for hundreds and thousands of years, and no exaggeration, my family have lived in their village of Malha. Malha, that's southwest of Jerusalem. That's where my family lived. And just to give you a little bit about the background about the village, so Malha became, in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, one of the important villages in the area of west of Jerusalem, west of Al-Quds. Because we in Malha had a train station, we had a railway that connects Jaffa. Jaffa is the ancient port for the country, for hundreds and thousands of years, to Jerusalem, the capital of the city. So if you think about it, even like when pilgrims used to come to visit the Holy Land and they come on the ships, they would actually get off in Jaffa, in the port, and they will take now the train to travel to Jerusalem. The train was cutting the trip shorter for the pilgrimage who would come from the west, from the coast, to come to visit Jerusalem. And the last station before you come to Jerusalem, you will stop in Malha. That means also the first station going back to Jaffa will also be in my village. So what does that mean? It means that it gave to the village the ability to travel, the ability to connect to the outside world, the ability to also produce the vegetables and the fruits and the things that the people used to make in my village. All of that I'm talking about the 19th century. In my village, we had a high school in that area of Jerusalem where it was very rare to have high schools at that time, a football club, a theater. So you can just then imagine from there how life was for the people there. My grandparents were born in Malha. They grew up there. My great-grandfather built a big house in the village. All that was happening until we come to 1948. Now, in May 1948, that was several months after the partition plan came, and the international community thought that the solution will be by partitioning Palestine between the Jews and the Arabs. So violence increased, and we are in Jerusalem, and the Jewish militant groups, the Haganah, the Jewish militias, were coming toward us, and they were attacking Palestinian villages on the way from Tel Aviv, Jaffa, all the way to Jerusalem. And so what happened is that one of our neighboring villages was attacked, Ain Karim, Deir Yassin, Ras Abu Ammar, all of these villages, and because of massacres that were committed against the population there, my people and my family were really scared to stay in their homes because they were going to be attacked after. And that happened. Malha was attacked. So my grandparents found themselves forced to move and to run away to a refugee camp that was just established outside of Bethlehem for the refugees who are fleeing these acts of violence. Now, my grandparents end up in this refugee camp just outside of Bethlehem, and they were hoping that this will be for a short time, meaning in some time the violence will stop and they will go back to their home, to their village. That was just a few miles away. They could actually see it. But those a few days, a few weeks they hoped for end up becoming a year and a half. And by the end of 1949, a ceasefire agreement was made between the Arab forces from different Arab countries and the new established state of Israel. And that led to the map that you see right now, which is the green line. We call it the green line. It's also the ceasefire line between the forces. And according now to the ceasefire agreement and according to the new situation, Israel will not allow any Palestinian refugee to go back to where they used to live. And my grandparents found themselves still in Palestine. They didn't leave to Jordan yet, in their country, but living in a refugee camp, losing their home, losing so much of what their life used to be. Now, my grandfather did not want to stay in the refugee camp. He took my grandmother and their kids. They moved to the town of Bethlehem. My parents were born in Bethlehem, and they lived during the Jordanian occupation before 1967. And after 1967, they found themselves living and growing up under the Israeli occupation. My father, at some point, when he was young, he said, "That's it. I have no hope, no future for me to stay there. And I want to have a better life. I want to have a better future." That's why my father left. And my father's plan was to go all the way to Europe, but he didn't really succeed to go to Europe. He didn't go to Europe. He ended up just in Jordan, in Amman. And my mother also moved there. They got married, so that's why I was born there. And not in Bethlehem, in the West Bank where I live now, and not in Malha in Jerusalem. In 1995, something different happened in this story. In 1995, the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership are engaged now in negotiations, in peace talks. That was started as in Oslo, in Norway, and was called the Oslo peace process later. And now the leadership is talking about a two-state solution and finally putting an end to the occupation and find a formula to accept one another, to recognize between both sides, and to move on from this conflict, to put an end to it. It was a time of hope. My parents felt very hopeful. It didn't say anything about Jerusalem and Malha, will we be able to go back to our home there, but the fact it talks about ending the occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, that was a big sign of hope. And because of that, my parents knew that this is the right moment for them to go back. And since they were born in the West Bank already, before 67, unlike other Palestinians, they could actually come back. So my family moved back, my parents, my extended family is still mostly in Bethlehem. And this is when I came to live in Palestine. I was only 3-4 years old, and I barely have any memories from that time. But I want to walk through with you. I want to tell you a little bit how I remembered life and how grew up in this situation. How did I grow up in this situation? I'm talking about the time now between 1995 and the year 2000, those 5 years. So I remember the time when in Bethlehem, my father used to work in Jerusalem. It's so close, it's about 15 minutes driving away, that's it. It's something like 5 miles, I would say. And you would drive from Bethlehem to the old city of Jerusalem. It's not really that far away. And my father used to drive his car to go to his work in Jerusalem. This is something illegal now. From the year 2000 and on, the level of separation that we live, that Rabbi Hanan mentioned in the beginning of his talk, there is no Palestinian is allowed to drive from the West Bank to Jerusalem or outside. But I remember that of a time where we used to travel much easier. And I remember of a time when we used to go at the weekends, if we want to go to Yafa or to Haifa or to Akka, we used to have that. Now, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that in those 5 years, between 1995 and 2000, peace prevailed, we were living so peacefully, and there was no conflict in the land, and everything was fine. I'm just sharing some of my memories, because at the same time, at that time, in the 90s, there was still the army in the West Bank, there's the occupation, there's the settlements, there's the bomb suiciding attacks inside Israel, and there's the violence, as long as also the negotiations between the politicians are going on. And then we come to the year of 2000. And in 2000, we were hoping and that this will be the end of the conflict and that the process will succeed to bring us to an end of the occupation, Palestinian statehood. It did not. It failed miserably, you can say, and it left us even with more complicated situation on the ground than before, with more division, with more partitions, with more segregation, and with different authorities. And that led and created so much of frustration. The people were so frustrated that they didn't succeed, and it seemed like we are just doomed to continue to live in this conflict. And as a result of this frustration, on the Palestinian side, the reaction was the second Intifada, the second Palestinian uprising that was supposed to push the occupation to end. That's what happened on my side. Now, I grew up during the years of the Intifada. And to tell you what that means, so by 2002, the city of Bethlehem, where I live, was completely under a heavy siege, was besieged. The Israeli army came to crack down on Palestinian Authority and also Palestinian militant groups. And the Palestinian security forces was fighting the Israeli army invasion, and it was a full-scale war out in the streets. And the fighter jets were bombing Bethlehem. F-15 and F-16 and Israeli tanks were moving in, and some of the security forces were trying to defend the city from invasion. Outside of my home, it was a full-scale war. People are being killed, people are taken to jail. And as much as you want to be away from that violent reality, you can't be. It's just like in your life. For example, like in our house in Bethlehem, on the other side of the valley, Israel was building a settlement in the previous years. And there's, of course, a military camp next to it. And every night, the Israeli soldiers and the Palestinian soldiers, Palestinian security forces, will exchange fire in that area so that the houses will be hit by bullets at night. And since my room was actually exposing the other side, I was like every night seeing bullets coming from the Israeli side toward my room. So I wasn't sleeping in my room. For a couple of months, we had to sleep in a room in the house that's not exposed to the other side because of the fire. And that's just a little bit. It's a small example of the level of violence that we lived, that I lived, and how the situation, you can say, turned out to be. From what felt to me like a peaceful life, a normal life, before 2000, to become completely living in a middle of a war zone. Now, I was old enough to understand that this is not a normal life. I shouldn't be living this way, under curfews, under occupation, fearing for my life, with no security. That's not a normal life. And I didn't want to accept the situation. I was even further, I was angry on the situation because I felt that this whole situation was enforced upon me, and I didn't choose it, I didn't create it myself, but I have to live through it, I have to deal with it. And more than that, I felt, to be honest with you, I felt like I'm unlucky. I'm very unlucky. The reason for why I live in these circumstances is mostly because of two things. Because of who I am, the identity that I was born with as a Palestinian, and the fact that my parents brought me to live in Palestine. So those are the two reasons that made me feel that I'm unlucky. Maybe if I was born somewhere else in the world, I'll have a different life completely. And just, you can say, okay, that's so clear. But to even think about that at that young age was fueling inside me a lot of anger on the situation. At the same time, with that anger comes a question, what do you want to do? Because now I have to choose for my life. And this is something serious. What should I do and what can I do? Now, the first answer that came to my mind was like this. I can't do anything about the situation over there, and the best decision maybe I can make is to run away. Get out of there. Just leave. You can't change the reality there. You can't change the situation. It's way bigger than I can have an impact on it. And probably what I need to do is to run away. You can say more or less, I start to think like my father when he was young, and he decided that he have no hope, he have no future, and he should just leave. And I was certain that this is the right thing to do. At the same time, because I'm so angry on the situation, I also blame the people who create the situation. So in my case, as a Palestinian, the first side I will blame the side of the enemy. So I will blame the Israelis for what they did to us in the past, what they continue to do to us. But I will not stop there also. I will also blame, and I might blame, my side as well. I will blame the older generations. I'll say it's also their fault. They didn't do enough. They didn't succeed in their time. That's why we are facing this situation. They didn't take enough responsibility. I might also choose to blame the leadership on one side or the other side, the political leadership. But after I'm done with all of the blaming, and I'm facing the situation, I'm asking myself what to do, then I say, how can I blame the older generation, especially on my side, and saying they didn't do enough, and I want to run away from the situation? Because that didn't seem like really the right thing to do. It felt like I'm just abandoning and running away from the problem. Is that a solution? It could be a solution for me, for myself. But how am I helping my people? How am I serving my people? I am not. And because of that, you can say that the idea of running away wasn't the only idea in my mind, because I come back to the question of what should I do out of sense of responsibility. Okay, so what do I want to do? Now, if you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank under these circumstances that we are talking about, and if you are my generation, then you don't need a geopolitical lecture to understand, or a political lecture to understand what makes our life there complicated. The number one reason that makes our life there complicated is the fact that we live as a nation, as a people, under occupation. What do I mean by that? That we live under the control of another nation, that we don't have our freedom, our saying in what we want, to choose our destiny. And that occupation is not just a matter of controlling borders and controlling land. It controls your life on every different level. From the beginning of your life almost until the end, you are affected by the reality of living controlled by another people, not your own people. It becomes clear to us that in this situation, that our political collective rights, our national rights, what we call our national rights, are being forbidden for us, and also sometimes our basic human rights as individuals are being taken away from us because we live under the occupation. So it becomes very clear to every Palestinian that we have to fight this occupation. We have to put an end to it if we are ever going to have a better future in our homeland, in our country. And I'm not talking now about the conflict, the 70 years old, the 100 years old conflict. I'm not living in 1948 or 67. I'm living here, in now, at the present. So when I say I want to fight the occupation, I mean literally fight. And this is not a unique situation that only the Palestinian people find themselves under occupation. We are the only occupied people on earth. That's not the case. There are many nations through their history who have been under occupation or control of other nations, under oppression. And usually what nations do in response to that, they strive for their freedom. They fight. They call it the war of independence, many countries. They also call it a struggle for liberty. And that's what should be doing. And when I say that, I mean, if I want to fight the occupation in the most effective way, and if I want to fight the occupation violently, that means that I am putting my life at risk. I could be arrested, I could even be killed in the process of fighting the occupation. But at that age, I felt like I had to make the decision to say that I'm willing to pay my life as the price for the freedom and dignity of the future generations of my people. That's me at 15 years old. That's a little bit of my reality. That's how I saw and I feel about the situation. Now, I want to tell you, so I am living there and I want to fight the occupation. How could it be that today I am talking to Israelis and I'm talking to Israeli settlers, because it might seem contradicting to some people here that I am talking about two things that they seem very contradicting. So here is the story. In 2016, I was hired to guide a group of American students. And this group is coming actually to visit the region. They are visiting Israel and Palestine to learn about the reality that we are living there. It was a group of collective Christian universities here in the US, and they are coming on a program called Middle East Studies. And what they do on this program, as I said, they visit the region and learn more about it. So they focus on, it's not just like tourism, and like sightseeing, it's also trying to understand deeply this political conflict or this conflict in that part of the world, and doing that by visiting the place, by meeting with people. Usually their program was divided to two parts. The first part, they visit the Israeli side. So what they do, they have their Israeli guide, they go around the country, they land in Tel Aviv, they go to Jerusalem, they go up north and south. Through their Israeli guide, they hear about the Israeli history, the narrative, the Israeli perspective or perspectives, and they spend this week learning about the Israeli side. They also meet with people, and those people are people who represent the civil society, people who also represent the government. They might meet with one or two or three political official people who represent certain official positions in the government, maybe from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, maybe from the Israeli Knesset, the parliament. And by the end of this week, they come to the Palestinian side to do the same thing. So from Jerusalem, usually, as a meeting point, and then going up to Ramallah, maybe Nablus, Jericho, Bethlehem, Hebron, all of these cities in the West Bank. So I was hired to be one day with them, and my tour with them is to take them to the city of Hebron, which is south from Bethlehem in the south of the West Bank, about 45 minutes driving away. So I wasn't with them the whole week, but I was with them one day. And I'm telling you this day because that's the day that I found about roots. And I want to tell you how things actually happened that day. So I'm taking this group, and maybe I forgot to tell you why I am guiding the group, like what put me in that position of guiding groups. That's what I started to do since 2014. In Bethlehem, I started to guide groups that visit the country. Now, I don't know how much you know, but like 70% of tourism to the Holy Land, to Israel and Palestine, is made of Christian pilgrimage. Christians who want to go and see and visit the Holy Land, right? And after they come to Jerusalem, definitely they will come to Bethlehem. So here, in certain sense, you can say the Christians across these boundaries, these borders between the Israelis and Palestinians, and they see the Holy Land. And they also choose to see how to see the Holy Land, because so many of these tours, and I'm not saying necessarily this in a critical view, but like so many of these tours, they see the Holy Land through the lens of religion. But few groups started to want to see the land, not just the holy stones and the holy places, but also the people of the Holy Land. And so they choose to see the Holy Land through the lens of people and the conflict that happens there. In other words, we call it there geopolitical tourism. So I became a geopolitical tour guide in where I take groups that want to learn about the conflict, study about the conflict. There are Israeli and Palestinian guides doing this. I think you can assume that. So I'm taking this group of students to Hebron. We began our tour in the morning in Bethlehem. We left the hotel in Bethlehem, and we are now driving together on the bus toward Hebron. We soon leave Area A, that's the city of Bethlehem, and now we are driving in Area C. And so the group is actually observing, looking around, and asking me questions about what they are seeing. The military checkpoints, the roads, the different license plates, the settlements, the towers that set up by the army, the attacks, the things that happens, the facts on the ground, the new facts on the ground, as we call them, two-state solution, what's happening with that. And the more they ask questions, the more I answer them, and the more I'm conveying to them the Palestinian perspective and experience of the situation. And now we arrive in Hebron, and I'm walking with them in the streets of Hebron. And of course, Hebron has a very rich history of over 3,000, 4,000 years old. We talk a little bit about that, but the time only limits us to focus on the last 100 years, and especially on the last 30 years since the Oslo Agreement was signed, and what is the situation right now in Hebron as one city in the West Bank. So we go together, I'm talking about the situation, and at some point we have lunch for the group. Now, for the nature of the tour, lunch will not be at a restaurant, but we actually organized that the lunch will be at someone's house, a family that opened their house to us to host a group, to serve them lunch, and also for the group to get the chance to meet with local people, to listen from them about their life, about their experience, what does it mean for them as a family living in Hebron, how the situation affects them, what does it mean to live under occupation. And by the end of the day, almost we are in the end of the day actually. The group have listened, learned, you can say a little bit understand or understood the situation, the Palestinian experience. I don't usually predict from them or expect them to fully understand what it is like to be under occupation, to live in that situation, but to understand a little bit of it. So now we finished our tour almost. I thought like we are toward the end, and we still have 2 more meetings to do. Now I look at the itinerary, and the meeting that we have, of course I knew before that, is supposed to be with an Israeli settler who lives in Hebron. Now I have been a tour guide for 2 years. This was like really strange and weird thing that I was asked to do, because most of the groups that I worked with have already worked in this form or in this way, that their first week is on the Israeli side, so they meet the Israelis, and the second week on the Palestinian side. Now I thought about it. What does it mean for me as a Palestinian guide in the West Bank to take my group into a meeting with a settler? Now definitely tour guides would find it probably problematic. I'm giving a floor to an Israeli settler to talk to the group. You know, what might he or she tell them? It didn't took me long to actually think that, you know, I shouldn't be worried about it, because I was showing the group the facts on the ground, the situation, and they can themselves hear and listen and learn more about it and know how to judge for themselves. That's how I was thinking about it. Now, I thought, okay, if I'm bringing my group to meet with a settler in the West Bank, probably it will happen in a settlement. I can't go there. I can't go inside. As a Palestinian, I'm not allowed to go inside the settlement, even if I was the guide of the group. So I thought that the most practical way of doing it will be that I will bring the group to the entrance of the settlement, and where the soldiers usually stand and the guards, and I hand over the group to the speaker there, and they go inside. I wait outside somewhere until the group comes back after an hour and a half, and that's how we are going to do it. So I talked to him on the phone, to the speaker, to the Israeli settler, and he told me, listen, I want you to also be part of this. I want you to come and listen to the things I'll say. So now me and him are thinking where that can be, where legally can both of us meet with the group and sit in the same place in the city of Hebron. There is no place like this. So finally he said, what about if we go to the Cave of the Patriarchs? The Cave of the Patriarchs, the Ibrahimi Mosque. This place was mentioned already in Hebron. If we can go there, maybe we can sit with the group there. But I told him, listen, I mean, you know, there is checkpoints there. There are 3 checkpoints. And that place, since 1994, is divided by the army to 2 places. There is the Muslim section in where Palestinians are allowed and tourists, but not Israelis. And there is the Jewish section where Israelis are allowed and tourists, but not Palestinians. So of course he wanted us to go on the Jewish section of the cave. And so I told him this. He said, don't worry, I know some of the soldiers down. If you just like walk between the groups and they don't see you, I walk in the front, you will smuggle yourself, and that's how they will not find about you, and that's how you are on the other side. So I did it. I did it for 2 reasons. Not because I trusted him, just like met with him, but 2 reasons. One, think about it. I felt very curious. I mean, I'm a tour guide. I'm taking people to this place many times. I never ever in my life saw the cave, the mosque from the Jewish side, from the other side. I've always stood at that checkpoint and just like looking at it there and like seeing the other people there, and never ever in my life crossed that checkpoint. And by the way, there is like no wall, there is no barbed wire or anything. It's just a military checkpoint in the middle of the road. But it feels like, it always felt that there is this invisible barrier that I cannot see, I cannot like really cross there. And I see the other people there, usually, and I see them as objects. But that's another story. I will not talk about this now. I don't want to mix the stories. So he says this, I followed what he said. The soldiers didn't see me, and now I'm on the other side of the checkpoint. The second reason why I actually do it, beside curiosity, I also felt a sense of immunity. I said, you know, if he is the settler, and he's like, you know, of course, he's Israeli, he talks Hebrew, he's like, he knows the soldiers, as he said, anything, you know, goes bad, he will have to handle it and deal with it. And now we are on the other side. We sat, and then he began to tell us about his experience. Very much like what I'm doing right now, he started to tell us his life story, who he is and why he's living there. And that's what is the group looking for. They want to hear this perspective. They felt like they have been traveling in Israel, but they did not cover the settlers' perspective. They didn't like find this, of course, in Tel Aviv or inside Israel proper, and now in the West Bank. So I just will quote a little bit from the things that he said, and I'll tell you how I was affected by listening to him. The first thing he said that he was born here in the US, and he grew up as an American Jewish citizen. And he made sure to tell the group that he had a very good life here. And he didn't leave this country because he felt like he was forced out or forced to leave it, but he traveled on his will, thousands of miles away, to go to that land where he considered it's the land of his ancestors, because that's how he's fulfilling his Jewish identity. That's how he's feeling the connection to his Jewish identity. And I'm listening to this, and to tell you, as a Palestinian, of all of my life, was learned to differentiate between Judaism as a religion and Zionism as a political ideology, as a political movement. And my first reaction to his talk was, okay, he's a Zionist. I wasn't expecting something else, but he's a Zionist. To me, that means this American person, regardless of his religion, really believes that this is his land. And he's entitled to leave his country and move over there and come settle the land and live on it. And he's not talking about Tel Aviv or inside Israel. He's talking about the West Bank. He's talking about like Hebron, where I live. So listening to him, I felt like, okay, I'm listening to the Zionist perspective, to the Zionist narrative about who's the other side. And then the second thing, he said two things. One thing he said, there is no occupation. He's now describing the situation over there. He said there is no occupation, there is no such thing. Because the return of my people, meaning his people, to our land cannot be described as occupation. This was the first time ever in my life, at the age of 25, 26 years old, literally, I hear someone denying the occupation. Never ever in my life, I heard someone saying such an idea, and I didn't understand what he just said, and I couldn't process even what he said. The volume in my head was getting louder and louder. I'm talking to myself, like, what this nonsense that he just said? Like, he lives here, doesn't he know that we also live under Israeli martial law, and the Israeli army is controlling everything in the West Bank, borders, land, airspace? What he's talking about, there's no occupation. To me, it was a very obvious, like, legal and political question. It was a very obvious legal political status. He was maybe talking about something else. At that time, I couldn't really understand what he was talking about. He said there's no occupation. I thought he's deluding the most obvious thing, the reality, where he's living, I said to myself. And the second thing he said, there is no Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian people. This one I was more familiar with. To tell you why, because also as a Palestinian, learning about the other side, about the enemy, about the Zionist ideology, as my people would call it, I always learned one thing about the Zionist leaders in Europe. The Jewish Zionist leaders in Europe in the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, they were going around telling Jewish people, a land without people for a people without land. Meaning that the Jewish people were forced out 2,000 years ago, went on exile. The land is empty, and the Jewish people are in diaspora, and the people should go back to their land. Now, by us Palestinians, the way how we experienced that was a denial of our existence, of our mere existence from the beginning of the conflict. They denied us. They denied that we ever exist. Now, of course, Zionist leaders were much more smarter than that, and they realized that the land is occupied. There are people living on the land. But, and I want to add one more thing. The source of this sentence, a land without people for a people without land, originally did not came from Judaism, or did not actually came from the Zionist movement. It came from Christian, evangelical, Christian Zionism, that today we call it Christian Zionism, but like Christian evangelical belief that wanted to kick out Jews from Europe and wanted them to see them leaving and going there for the purpose of fulfilling certain prophecies. So a very messianic thinking that wants to drive the Jews to the land, hopefully that this will be the second coming of the Messiah, second coming of Jesus. Now I'm entering a very dangerous territory here. The second coming of the Messiah, that then they believe that then all the Jews will be converted to Christians. Because I do believe that Christians have a big part, I disagree with Hanan, have a big part in our conflict. Now, so I listened this from him, and I feel very denied. Because everything he said about his story, about the reasons that made him live there, was denying everything that I experience and my identity. There is no occupation, there is no Palestinian people, so who I am, what I'm doing there. The group also like, okay, so why there is a conflict? Like, explain to us the conflict. The group got what they want. They wanted a settler perspective. They ask questions. They ask hard, challenging questions. We listen to his answers. But I'll tell you, by the end of his talk, I'm taking the group and we are leaving back to Bethlehem. And on the way, I'm thinking, after I gave like some technical notes on the bus to the group, I'm just looking at the road ahead of us and I'm thinking about this encounter that I had. And it dawned on me that this Israeli settler we just met with, that I brought my group to meet with, was the first Israeli that I ever talked to. Someone can say, what do you mean? I mean that until that point in my life, living in the West Bank, the only Israelis that I engaged with and the only Israelis I encountered, naturally, were the Israeli soldiers at the checkpoints. When the soldiers come to arrest someone in Bethlehem. And in the soldiers, we don't have dialogue or conversation. It's like just very short conversation, orders. I don't really have, I can say, a conversation with a soldier. But I understood that he is a settler and he is representing a certain perspective that's not the mainstream in Israel. But that level of denial was so strong that I said to myself at that moment that I met my first Israeli and the last one. I'm not going to meet with any one of them after this. That's what I said to myself at that moment. Now, I just realized that I'm meeting with my second Israeli on the same day. On that very same day. So how is that? So I'm still going back with the group to Bethlehem, and we are now supposed to meet with Rabbi Hanan. And I read for the itinerary, and I thought, that's what I assumed, that the meeting is going to be with another settler. Rabbi Hanan lives in Gush Etzion, which is halfway between Bethlehem and Hebron, in Alon Shvut, and that the meeting with him, the purpose of the meeting was to also still cover the settler's perspective on the conflict, on the situation. But actually it turned out to be that it's much more than that. There is an organization, it's called Roots, and there are Palestinians involved. It got like really weird to me. I wanted to get like more information about it. So I called one of my colleagues. I asked him, Saeed, he's in Bethlehem, just tell me more about Roots. I don't get it. Aren't we going to meet with settlers? And then Saeed says, no, not exactly. I was like, what is this? And he said, like, there are Israeli settlers and Palestinians. And I say, yes, what they are doing. And he said, they are talking about peace. That sounded like the most ridiculous, the most dangerous, and the most suspicious thing that I can ever hear in my reality. Because on one hand, I learned about that there are Palestinian-Israeli peace organizations, joint organizations, that mostly were created or established during the Oslo agreements. In the Second Intifada, they had a huge setback, and they barely exist anymore. And there are few of these groups that's still talking to one another. And I would question a lot, like, why even these groups still exist? Who thinks that, we can talk and we should talk to the enemy? That's how I thought about it. And those people are definitely wrong with what they are doing. So you can imagine now, I want to go to Roots not because I want to meet with the Israelis, I want to meet with the Palestinians and find out who are they, what they are doing. So I go to Roots with the group, and then Rabbi Hanan was there, and we were supposed to meet with Ali as well, who appeared in the video. And Ali wasn't, for some emergency, he couldn't actually be there that day. It was only Rabbi Hanan. So we sat, and then Rabbi Hanan received us and started to talk about Roots and about his story, gave us the introduction, he talked about his story. I can tell you that for the first 10 minutes, listening to Rabbi Hanan describing his identity and himself was really very hard for me to sit there and to listen. I was saying to myself, again, he's talking about 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, about the return of his people. There's no mention of occupation. There's no mention of what happened to my grandparents. And then I said to myself, why I'm still even sitting there, expecting from an Israeli settler to talk about my people, to talk about what happened to us, to talk about what they are doing to us. I said, just give up. There's no point of it. And you know what? It's the end of the day. I'm tired. The group wants this. I don't have to be here. So what can I do? There is the bus driver, poor man, he's sitting alone outside, waiting for us. Maybe I can just join him and sit with him. So you can say I wanted to run away from it. But I felt it's actually a mistake. It's wrong for two reasons. One, I felt it's a mistake of me like leaving the group in this situation, just like going out to sit with a bus driver. But two, and that's the most important reason, I felt it's also too early of me and wrong of me to judge on the person who's talking right now already and to say that there is no point of me listening to him. Even though I am being challenged and upset by how he's talking about the reality, how he's describing himself. And I stayed. And I listened, and it wasn't the easiest thing, it was difficult, but I continued to listen. And then Rabbi Hanan started to tell us the stories of himself realizing that there is another people here exist, that the land has also another name, that we live under different legal and political circumstances than he lived. Talks about these meetings with Jamal and his family, about Ali and his family and how that affected him. That was very unexpected to me, and I felt it was very, very brave. Because at some moment, Rabbi Hanan revealed to us, he shared with us, that he even questioned his own identity. What I am doing here, if those people are true, if there is occupation, if it's Palestine, what I am doing here, who I am. And at the end, he ended his talk with this idea that I can no longer live in this land until I fit two truths into one heart. The truth of my people, my story, and the truth of their people and their story have to be in one heart, in my heart. We left the meeting. We are back on the bus. The group wanted to talk to me, and they want to ask me. They asked me, what do you think about the last speaker we just met with? I really didn't know what to say immediately. I didn't know what to respond. I'm still processing the things that Rabbi Hanan said and what I listened from him. And then now they tell me we are confused. I told them why. And they said, how could it be that he's a settler in the West Bank and yet talk about the occupation? How could it be that he's a Zionist, a proud Zionist, but yet talk about a catastrophe for another nation and that there's another nation that they exist and they have also equal legitimacy? How could it be? It's contradicting. He's holding both stories together. And I didn't feel for a second that there was a contradiction here. Because I remember, unlike the denial that I felt when I left Hebron with meeting with the first Israeli that I met, after meeting Rabbi Hanan, I felt two things: recognition and empathy. Recognition and empathy. Most Israelis and most Palestinians do not give one to another any recognition or any sense of empathy, definitely. And that's very challenging, and even you can say weird when it happens. When you meet someone that you thought for all of your life you thought, and you lived as that he is your enemy, but then you hear so that much recognition and empathy from the enemy side, it challenges a lot the way how you think about the reality, the way how you think about them and us. So what changed? What changed inside me? So how do I relate to the other people right now? The fact that Rabbi Hanan actually was showing so much recognition and empathy and was talking about what we are going through, I think this is what allowed me to even allow myself to think about who they are, what they are doing here, and what's their story. Because for the first time ever, Rabbi Hanan succeeded to show me his identity, not at the expense of my identity. To tell me his story and his people's story, not by weaponizing it, using it against my story and my people's story, but in a fashion that both stories can exist. And even put it as a condition that I can no longer be who I am and practice my identity without accepting and finding a room in my heart for the other side identity. This is really something very, something so deep, something so big, but it was so obvious, and I do understand why the students feel the contradiction and why I didn't feel a contradiction. There's a difference between me and them. They looked at the situation very pragmatically, practically from outside. They didn't feel that recognition, and I understand that. I left back to Bethlehem that day thinking so much about the things that Rabbi Hanan said. And it's all of my life. It's not like a news to me that I know that the Jewish people are connected to the land, that they have history. I always knew that. I wasn't against that. I was against what came out of it, what was a result of it, what we have suffered and lost from it. And now it seems like Rabbi Hanan had gave me a different path, a different way of thinking about it. So I went back to Bethlehem. I thought about the things that he said. I felt like I need to go back, meet with him again. We did. And I went back to the center. I met with Ali as well. Listened to his story and his experience. It wasn't less inspiring to me. What he went through in the first Intifada and going through violence and being in jail, and after the second Intifada, losing his brother and all of what his family did was also for me very, very important to listen and to engage with. And at the end, I'll tell you, I found myself joining Roots. And one of the reasons why I joined Roots, it goes back to the middle of my story, when I was taking responsibility and doing something. And so for most of my life until then, I thought that we are doomed to have this fight. We are doomed to live and struggle for our freedom, meaning that the only path that I could see forward was only through resistance. And mostly, for me, resistance was the violent resistance in the West, which is happening today in the West Bank, a form of violence. And now I think that there is another framework where people can actually invest their energy in changing the reality without end up killing one another. Now, very often people tend to describe what we are doing in this organization, people are used to it, to describe it this way, that we are creating coexistence. Coexistence by itself is not a bad word, it's a nice one. But it's actually not getting exactly what we are doing, who we are. It's not, because if we are just about creating coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians under the current political configuration that exists now, that's completely wrong. Because that means it was just like saying that we should become friends and accept that we will live under occupation and we will live in this conflict forever. But I rather refer to what we are doing, not only we, but other groups, other partnerships, as co-resistance. Co-resistance. It's not just like a nice word that I want to use, but I was thinking for all of my life that resistance meant that I think about my people, about our future on the land. Never ever in my life I thought that I should also include the other people and think about their future as well, because it's tied together. I thought that our right of self-determination is an exclusive right for us. We just think about ourselves. But their right of self-determination is also affecting us. And so I'm saying that both people cannot think exclusively of their future on that land, because in a way or another, we share that land. We live on the same land. Whether if it's a two-state solution, a one-state solution, it doesn't matter what exactly the solution is. What matters is that both people will always feel that they belong to the land, that they connect to this land. So that's why I joined Roots. Rabbi Hanan said something about like us working in the West Bank, and that's very true. That we focus so much because there are other groups and other partnerships, as I hinted, who work across the country, across borders. They bring Israelis from all around Israel and Palestinians from the West Bank, and also some voices or some people from Gaza. That exists. We are mostly the only organization that focuses on the West Bank, but I will say also that so many times we had people from different places in the country coming to us and find some inspiration in the work that we are doing, in the language we are doing. At least one of the things is that we are the people who are living on the front lines of the conflict are able to do that. So that gives a model for other organizations, other groups, other populations to feel that they can do something about this. This is my story, and that's how I joined Roots. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We'd like to begin questions and answers. First, though, we're showing a slide here, how to sign up for our monthly newsletter. We send it out. You had it.
It's loading. It's coming up.
In addition, you can use the QR code. Here it is, to sign up for the newsletter. We promise not to send you anything more than once a month. And in addition, we have 2 clipboards going around. You can look in the back. You don't want to use the code, you can manually take one of the clipboards going around and sign up with your name and your email address. So,
yes, please.
I would like to know the relationship between Roots and Ali Abu Awad's nonviolent resistance movement. I'm curious.
okay. Ali Abu Awad, as you saw in the film and you heard, is the Palestinian founder of Roots, together with the Israelis who founded the organization, myself and others. Before we founded Roots 10 years ago, Ali had in mind to do something else, to found something else. He wanted to found a Center for Palestinian Nonviolent Resistance, but that got off track because he met us Israelis and we founded Roots. Already from the beginning of Roots, Ali was always saying he's in it temporarily. He's going to help it get off the ground and lead it forward, but then he'll hand it off to someone else, and he wants to go back to what he had in mind. So it was about 2 or 3 years into Roots that Ali said he's leaving. He passed the Palestinian leadership on to his half-brother, Khalid, who until today is the Palestinian director of Roots, Khalid Abu Awad. And Ali founded, together with the Palestinians, an organization that in English is Change. And as Ali explained it to us in Roots, us Israelis, he said that he believes that Roots has the vision for the future, but most Palestinians are not ready for it. And he wants to go back to his community, the Palestinian community, and prepare them for the work of Roots. Prepare them by working on local empowerment and local taking of responsibility. So Change worked with planting trees in Palestinian areas, doing cleanup campaigns, doing workshops, teaching people, primarily youth and women, how to take control and take responsibility. I'm sure Noor knows more than I do, so I just want to, leave it like that.
You should have let me answer from the beginning. Okay.
So that is what Ali told me. I mean, I told the truth.
Yeah. But here's the thing: to put the things in much more clearer language. The current political configuration that we live under occupation, and we have divided leadership in the Palestinian side, represented by the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and by Hamas in Gaza. We did not have elections for a long time, for many years, over 17 years, and we were promised by both leaderships that we are going to have our own independence, our own state, and end of occupation soon. That didn't happen. The Palestinian Authority followed the path of diplomacy, of negotiations, of hoping that the international community will implement international law and put pressure on Israel, and that didn't happen enough. And Hamas promised us that through militant resistance, through fighting, we will pressure the Israelis to make the necessary concessions for our freedom. That also didn't happen. So in this configuration, a lot of the young people, my generation, feel totally disempowered. And you can say that in general, the civil society in Palestine feel that it's very disempowered today because of the political division in the country, the lack of a democratic process, the abandonment, because the thing is about Oslo, the 5 years in the Oslo agreement, it wasn't like let the Palestinians and the Israelis on their own, they will figure it out. There is a process that the international community will follow by us and actually help us to get there, but 2000, most of the international community took a step back and they left their responsibility, especially on the Palestinian side. So because of this sense of disempowerment among young Palestinians, many don't do anything at the end about the situation. They just try to go about their life. Some engage in what we describe as non-violent actions to try to challenge this reality, similar to Roots and other inside the Palestinian society or across borders. And some go to violence as the only solution that they feel they are left with. And so the idea of Ali and Change was that through this work of not just his organization, but other similar organizations that we have in the West Bank, we want to restore the role of the civil society, because the civil society has an agency and it must be restored and not be weighted by the politicians to allow us again to act as a civil society. So it's so much about civil society in action, not just with Israelis, not just in cross borders, but also in the Palestinian civil society itself. And Roots understands very clearly the power imbalance that exists between Israelis and Palestinians. In Israel, probably you would say, I will even challenge this idea that I will say now, that's not an issue. Israeli civil society is active. It's being represented and active in so many ways. I think that the current political situation in Israel is also challenging the ability of civil society. There is depolarization in the country, but that's another question to answer. That's another thing to talk about. But that's what's the idea of Ali is, and it's not just his idea. It's also something that's also needed in the Palestinian society. His organization and many other organizations are working on it and still work on it. So it's empowerment of civil society, of young generation to be more active and to find ways to affect the reality. Yes, please, and then you. Okay.
All right, I appreciate your conversation. And one of the last things that I'm not sure that I heard correctly, you spoke about coexistence, but did you offer up something, a slight alternative to coexistence?
I said that the work that we do is not rightly described as coexistence, but as co-resistance.
Okay, that's what I wrote down, but I just wanted to make sure. I love it. Thanks.
Thank you.
What does the Israeli government think of your organization? Are you a minor annoyance? Are you a threat? Do they make your life difficult?
Did you hear the question?
Yeah. Did everyone hear the question? The question, what does the Israeli government think about our work? So clearly the work we are doing is not in accord with the vision of the present Israeli government. And by the way, it's also not in accord with the direction and perspective of the vast majority of Israelis today. We don't work on the political level, we work on the grassroots level. So we have limited contact with national politicians. There are 3 members of the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament, who know about us and support our work. We rather focus locally, which means local politicians and local religious leaders, mayors, both Israeli and Palestinian, in our local area know about our work. Some are against it, some are in favor. We work with them.
Yeah, as Rabbi Hanan said, also we don't so much focus on the political or national political level, even though for the last 8 years of this work, my work allowed me to be also to step in sometimes and like establish some sort of connections with national level politicians. I'm talking about like ministers. We went also to the house of the Israeli president, Reuven Rivlin. We went to, there was a delegation of Roots that at some point was invited to Ramallah, but most of our work focuses on the ground. Now, of course, the current Israeli government, doesn't, I have also questions about like the near future, what will happen, to these organizations, not just to our organization, but in general, the organizations that are trying to build partnership, challenge the status quo, and definitely challenge the politics. Most of the time, Israeli government turn a blind eye on us, ignore us. Now, sometimes what we focus on is establishing connections with the mayors in our area, like the mayors of towns, settlements, villages, cities. So, and that's the level that we have the discussion at that level, because also it helps us in the level of activism. What do I mean by activism? When it comes to us engage in both societies trying to resolve certain issues. So when we have the mayors on our side, or at least they see what we are doing and are willing to come and take part of it in a way, that helps a lot, like the mission of Roots. Yes, please.
Thank you for being here. I'm not going to say this correctly, but as a Jewish person who reads the news, I am embarrassed and ashamed about the settlers in the West Bank who are violent and who hurt or kill other people. And I appreciate you as a rabbi coming as a leader to speak a different narrative. Where are the other rabbis? What is the Jewish community doing to tell the other people who are Jewish people, this is not who we are, and this is hurting us?
How can I answer that?
Yes.
There are other rabbis who are working against the violence, but you are absolutely right, they're in the minority. Most rabbis and most leaders are part of the worldview and the perspective that I described at the very beginning. They live in their own Jewish bubble, their own Jewish story. They really do not see what we Jewish Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. And by and large, they live in the world of fear and trauma. You'll hear from many, many Israelis since October 7th that I don't have a drop of empathy for the Palestinians. They will say that very clearly. There's no room in my heart for it at this point. You totally live in fear and trauma, circle the wagons, and they say, whatever we have to do to survive. And that it really is a psychological mode of survivalism.
So Roots definitely have a strong stand on violence, and I hinted like that we have activism. So how do I describe our work? Because we didn't really actually talk about what happens in the center really every day, what kind of programs. This is the first level of bringing both sides to meet one another. And like Rabbi Hanan said, to encounter the dehumanization and to create humanization that happens. This is not the hardest part, but people begin a journey to explore the other side, identity, connection, narrative about the land, and how we can find a way to make solutions. The second level is that people become they feel more responsibility. They feel they have a role to do something. And roots activists on both sides are always try to work and talk against that violence and send a different message. Many times when there's a violent attacks by one side or the other, we go out there and we visit the victims, whether from this side or the other side. We try to show to the societies that not just only we talk about peace, but like we are taking action. And as Rabbi Hanan said, we are only still like a small group of people. We need to be empowered. That's what's lacking. People like this are not being empowered. And the radical and violent voices are taking over from the sense of fear and from the sense that we have to defend ourselves, and this is the right thing to do. Both sides feel this way. And but that's just only increasing violence and only like adding more, I would say, more oil on the fire. You heard maybe in the recent couple of months that some European countries and even the US government are thinking to put certain sanctions on certain Israeli settlers who incite violence, who actually lead and incite more attacks against Palestinian communities. I think that in certain sense was a good start, but it also got stuck there. Like it's very symbolic rather than actually, because even in the current government right now, you have ministers who incite and who are part and encourage these like settler violence as well. It's in the institution, it's in the government. That's how bad the situation got. As you can say also on the Palestinian side that there's a radical leadership represented by Hamas who is also inciting violence against Israelis. So that's where we got to, and that's what we need to work against. I think that again, the countries who are intervening in our situation can play a positive role in that and can like create some sense of accountability, because they could really do that, but they are not yet doing this enough. And it also needs a movement from the ground like us.
Hi, I want to thank you both for being here and throwing light on the situation, both for the Israelis and for the Jewish people. I'm a Palestinian, lived here for 62 years from the West Bank, and have done a lot of work with various political groups here in Pittsburgh. But we always try to show both sides. If we have one Palestinian, we try to have another Israeli or Jewish person speak. So my question is, I haven't really heard a lot about roots, so twofold. How are you connecting with other people on the ground in Israel to raise this issue of human rights for all people? And secondly, are you traveling within the United States after this to other cities to spread the word? Because I think this would be impactful. It is the American public. It starts with change. We are the biggest force. I guess we're the biggest force in denying the reality of the Palestinians. So, thank you.
So Roots is, to answer the first question, how we are connected to people on the ground there, back home. Roots is a member of an umbrella organization, of a collective that's called the Alliance for Middle East Peace. The Alliance for Middle East Peace, or ALMIP. We're about 140, I would say 150 organizations that are very similar to us, grassroots, some more focused on the political level, trying to give like actual political solutions to how the conflict can be resolved, some focus on the people level, on the grassroots level, trying to do this work. Now, out of the 150, there are bigger organizations, there are small organizations, the organizations have more influence. I'll just mention some names. Standing Together, that's an organization that you should, I think, look up. They are doing a very important work. Combatants for Peace, Women Waging Peace, Women in the Sun, and many, many other names that you can find if you looked after like the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Now, we try to always be connected. There's also Rabbis for Human Rights. We always are connected to activists and to organizations. Some of these organizations, they will have a different theory of change and actually do not accept the work we are doing. They think it's too challenging. Rabbi Hanan said it. We crossed a red line, and we, the Palestinians, are now talking not just to Israelis, but to Israeli settlers. So they might think that this is actually something wrong, because they might think that the negativity, the bad thing coming out of it is I'm giving some sort of legitimacy to the settlers. That's not the intention. It's like Rabbi Hanan's statement at the end said very clearly that the right of the Jewish people to live in the West Bank, they have a right, but not at the expense of Palestinians, not the way how the settlements are being right now. But we choose to focus on a group that was left out for so long time, which is not just represented by the settlers, I would say. It was represented by people who would be called the extremists on both sides, people who are religious, people who are, they would, be described as the radicals and extremists on both sides. So that's how we try to connect as much as we can. And me and Rabbi Hanan are also members of another initiative that works on a political solution that's called Land for All, but that's another story there. So that's how we connect to the people as much as we can, and we start to stay in touch. And the second question about going in the U.S., yes, we are in a tour in the U.S., and I'm also in touch with other Palestinian activists who are going to certain places to speak. And we are speaking in different places. We are being invited mostly to Jewish communities. I would say we are invited also to speak to Christian communities. It's very challenging to actually get to the Muslim communities and the pro-Palestinian. And I understand why. I don't agree, but don't agree with all of the reasons why not to invite us and hear from us. But that's also part of the challenge. We sometimes have hard time to reach to one side or the other. Every tour is also sometimes different, but that's how the situation is. Eventually, I'll say that I hope that you understand that I am not claiming that I'm the representative of all of the Palestinian people, and that Hanan is not the representative of all of the Israeli people. We are just two Israeli and Palestinian who live on the land and share an experience with you and share what we think, how we can fix this problem on different levels. And that we hope, we are not trying to fix also the situation here, because we realize that there is also something to be done here, but we hope that we might a little bit help in that in certain sense. But our focus is back there, back home.
I just want to add one sentence, that a personal plea. If you think that you heard something that is powerful and resonates, we'd love your help in speaking to pro-Palestinian and Muslim groups in the U.S.
There's a question here.
Okay, I think it's going to you next. My questions are twofold. One, how did your families react, and how do you communicate with your families about these really tough issues? I think that's something that would resonate with people here. And secondly, are you hoping to have additional spaces other than your first community center so that Palestinians and Israelis can interact?
In my family, I have 4 kids, grown kids. One of my daughters has been the director of the Roots Summer Camp for about 7 years. She's on board, very much. I have another daughter who has come to a few activities with her husband, and her kids, my grandchildren, have been to our summer camp for 3 or 4 years. On the other hand, I'll add that same daughter that sends her kids to the summer camp every year, this past summer, a month and a half ago, said she can't. Just doesn't have it in her to send her kids to the summer camp. And I have a son who we've done a parlor meeting in his settlement. So he's on board. I have another son who's completely and absolutely against it.
So in my family, when I joined this work and I started doing it, my family mostly felt worried about it. First of all, this sense of worrying, you're going to meet with settlers, with Israelis, with the enemy. It's that comes with a lot of worrying. I think that my parents, I never felt it was hard for them to understand the value behind the work and the humanity of the other side. They weren't, I think also because of a different generation thing, because they did not live that severe level of separation and segregation that we live. They do know and they do feel that there are, of course, there are human beings on the other side. There are also good people, there are bad people, but they are affected by what they see, by the news, what Israeli, for example, officials say. So they, for themselves, they support the work that I'm doing. My parents, my siblings do. My sister was always arguing against it, and she even thinks that it's completely wrong what I'm doing. And so, like some of my friends, she thought that what I'm doing, I'm betraying my own people, and I'm not helping, and I'm giving legitimacy to the enemy. And she has very hard feelings about it. Before, like last year, I managed to bring her to the center, and she attended some activity, talked to some people. She started to begin to allow herself to see like what's happening really there, and to hold some judgments. But mostly, yeah, there are people in my circles who don't like what I do, and who stop talking to me. And there are people who actually like and encourage what I do. And there are people who even come to it still with a lot of hesitance and suspicion and questions, but allow themselves to, they trust me, they come to it. But I learned at the end, and I think this is something that we learned all at Roots. It's not in my hand to change the minds of my people and to convince them that they have partners on the other side. I thought this at the beginning. I was trying to convince them. I was quoting the stories that I hear from what Hanan is saying, what he's doing, what Shaul is saying, what he's doing, what Hadassah, what Etel. But I realized that what my job only actually was to find the way to create the circumstances for them to meet one another. Because then they will discover that they have a partner. If I try just to act like I'm of the prophet, to try follow me and I know the right way and you should just believe, that's not going to work on both sides. On both sides, not going to work. Only people, when they meet people from the other side, go through their own process, then realize if they have partners on the other side or not.
There's a second part of the question you asked about work in other areas geographically. Our center is between Bethlehem and Hebron, south of Jerusalem. We do have 2 other local associations in other places in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. In the Jordan Valley, we have a group that's been around for 7 years, that's part of Roots. Before October 7th, we were beginning to raise money to build a center there in the Jordan Valley. And in Samaria, between Nablus, Shechem in the north, down to Ramallah in the south, this is all north of Jerusalem, we have another group of Israelis and Palestinians. At one point, we had a center there. It was actually burned down. And we are trying to find a place and the money for a center there in Samaria.
Okay, first of all, I really want to thank you for being here. And I hope this is one of what will be many diverse conversations, respectful conversations that we need to continue to have. I know we're running short on time. I'd like you to speak briefly to the campus demonstrations here in the U.S. and more importantly, what can we as grassroots citizens from multiple perspectives, what can we do as Americans to help move the conflict forward?
Okay, so I'll say what I think personally. That's not necessarily represent everyone at Roots or represent the organization, but how my personal take on what's going on in the US. And here it is. Many people on my side and on the pro-Palestinian side, they will reject dialogue right now because they will say simply this is not a time of dialogue. What's happening over there is that people are being killed and dying. There is a mass killing, a war that's going on, and we need to step in to stop the violence. This is not about we can sit here and talk about it and feel good about it, and then how can we affect the reality? So, and I understand I strongly understand that the efforts, the energy should be put in a way that challenges and changes the U.S. government policies on the conflict and their input on it, in a way that will stop the violence right now, and then that will allow dialogue. Now, you might say that even dialogue in general between Israelis and Palestinians was difficult from the beginning, and from Jews and Palestinians and Muslims in general, it was hard to make dialogue about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I understand that. And I would say my answer to it is that the Palestinians experience what's happening over there as an occupation. One nation is stealing the rights of another nation, and that should end. And it doesn't end with dialogue. That's how they feel about it in my experience. And the Israelis experience that there is a conflict there. It was going before 1967, before the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. There is a conflict from before 1948 even. And of course, if we don't sit and talk together at some point, how could we solve this conflict? So I think there are different needs and different views how both sides relate to it. Now, I want to remind you also that we are living in a country, in my own feeling as Noor, even coming here to the US, I think that this US government, and I can understand to a deep level, like the U.S. government is, have ties to Israel, support Israel's security. But I was saying this also this morning, this war situation have led us in a place where if you are taking one side or the other, you are just end up supporting the extremists and forgetting that this is the life of people. Meaning, if you are supporting the state of Israel now, you are supporting the government of Israel and what's doing. If you are supporting the Palestinians, you are supporting Hamas and what's Hamas doing. And to put it in a different way, both leadership now are taking us in a collective suicide. Each side have their case to argue for security. We were attacked. No, we were attacked. We are trying to resist the occupation. All of these arguments, I've heard it so long. But at the end of the day, what's happening over there, we are both sides committing a collective suicide. That's what's happening. So to answer to your question, I felt very good and very strongly when I saw Palestinians and pro-Palestinians protesting on the campuses to try to stop and challenge the U.S. government policies. Now, do they change and do they affect the U.S. government policies? I really can't know. I don't tell. I'm not living here. I don't know how the system works. Sometimes I think there's a problem with the U.S. government intervention there. Sometimes I feel there's a problem with the Congress itself, because I feel like the U.S. State Department know what's good to do, but the government cannot go there to take such an action because also it doesn't have congregational or Congress support from that, because there were different politics. They relate to Israel, to the Middle East, what the U.S. should be doing there. And that's very challenging. There is so much money here in this country that put in war efforts to support sending weapons there. If you think there is enough money to put in peace, it's a fraction of what's being invested to support war efforts. Not just now, not just in this war, but in general. One of the unfortunate things that I came to encounter as a Palestinian doing this work is to realize that the pro-Palestinian movement got stuck, in my language, I might be wrong, but that's how I feel, got stuck in a competition of pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel on the campus, and that became like a conflict by itself there on the campuses. Like pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, and becomes like a conflict over there. I think this was a distraction. I don't think that this should have happened. And when there are Jews who talk about like different acts of anti-Semitism and what I do believe that anti-Semitism rised. Yet I don't call that when people stand up and they want to support the Palestinian side, it's all the time anti-Semitism. Because Israel have always used also anti-Semitism to push any really criticism of Israeli government actions or of the State of Israel actions. That's also part of the problem. How anti-Semitism happens and how anti-Semitism is also being used to push or not to push criticism. Push away, yeah. So that's also part of the issue that happens here, as far as I know. There's also part of the issue that, don't forget that the U.S. government and a lot of these campuses, they actually didn't give a chance. They crushed these protests from the beginning, and they didn't allow them to really protest and to speak. And I would hope that within the Jewish population, I have a high hope from the Jewish population here in the U.S., that they have the wisdom in their hearts and in their minds to understand that they should not be fighting the Palestinians here, and the Palestinians should not be fighting them, but both together should find a way to affect the U.S. government policies in a way that it will actually work for a better future for the people there, not for a continuous conflict. Now, this might sound too ideal, what I'm saying, but again, I'm not living here, I'm not dealing with the situation here, I'm dealing with the situation over there. And when people end up just choosing one side, they probably end up choosing this side over the other side. And it becomes like, I'm either pro this side or the other side. Is that helpful? I don't think it's helpful. Most of my people think it is helpful if we have people on our side. It will leverage our situation. People can see us, we are supporters. Most of my Israeli friends think it's helpful that there are people on their side. But in reality, it ends up like exporting the conflict and not really solving it, but putting it also in other contexts. And that's so much of what's happening, in my opinion, here in the U.S. And there are forces who are dragging this conflict and using it. So I'm not sure this semester, I went to speak in several colleges, several universities. It's not the best place I like to speak at, because this is where I get mostly attacked and doxed. But it went fine so far. I spoke in some campuses. I hope that the next semester we will see I hope to see a much more stronger movement. But it's not in a fashion that I support one side at the expense of the other side, but in a fashion that we want to support an end of this conflict. Like, I think that the pro-Palestinian movement here should focus on the ceasefire. That should be the main focus. Ceasefire, stop the violence, and release of hostages. That should be the main thing. And that the US government have so much responsibility to engage in a day after plan and a strategy to put an end to this conflict. And not just like, quick intervention here and there and just like some things and then leave the problem in an unsustainable situation until there's another break of violence. They have to intervene again. So there's so much I'm hoping for and looking for the reality here. But that's my opinion about what's going on.
Looking at the clock, it looks like we have to end. We have a 5-minute closing, so those people who have more questions, we promise to stay afterwards and we'll be available. We'd like to show you this slide that's up on the screen right now. It actually answers the question of what can you do. So please sign up for our monthly newsletter through the QR code you saw or through the clipboards going around. Our website is friendsofroots.net. There's a lot of information there, many articles and videos. I want to make sure you remember the name of the website, so let's say it all together. friendsofroots.net. Thank you very much. On Facebook, you can follow us, and also on Instagram and LinkedIn. Please donate to the best of your ability. This work will not continue without your contributions. You heard Noor saying it's very true that the U.S. government gives a lot of money to war, but not a lot of money to peace, and we need that money. We invite us to speak in other synagogues and other churches and mosques. And as we said earlier, we've spoken perhaps in 100 churches, 100 synagogues, 100 universities in the past 10 years. We've only spoken in 5 or 6 mosques. We do want that exposure. Let's go to the next slide. Also, you can host a parlor meeting for us in your home. We have a campus affiliate. We're about 11 or 12 campuses now. We began at the University of Texas in Austin, and we're now at Harvard and Penn and Columbia and other places I don't remember. Atidna is what we're called, which means in Arabic and Hebrew, our future. So you can use the QR code to get in contact with the people in charge of Atidna. And if you have kids or grandchildren or friends who are on campuses, we'd love to begin new chapters. I'll skip down to social media. A lot of people spend a lot of energy spreading the bad news on social media. You hear the terrible things the other side is doing to us, wherever the other side is, and you want the world to know. But bad news creates despondency, creates a sense there's no hope, and people have no hope. They twiddle their thumbs and don't get involved in good. My suggestion is that all of us try to let others spread the bad news, and we take upon ourselves to spread good news on social media. Good news means this event today. Good news means the other work of Roots that you can learn about through our newsletter and our website. Good news means other organizations in Israel-Palestine bring the two sides together for dialogue and understanding. Good news means the work happening in Pittsburgh here between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Good news means Democrats and Republicans talking to each other. There's a lot of good news. It's not on the front page of the newspapers. You have to look at the back page or on the websites of Roots or the other organizations that do the same work, similar work. Noor mentioned, find the other groups on the website of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. And if you spread good news, that creates a sense of hope. When people have hope, they take responsibility. And enough people taking responsibility can move the needle. Let's go to the next slide. You saw a trailer from the film about us. It's a full-length documentary movie. You can contact us through our website to screen the movie in your church or your synagogue or your mosque. It's called The Field. When you visit Israel or Palestine, what about visiting Israel and Palestine? Don't just see one side, see both sides, see the other side. Meet the people on both sides. Talk to politicians and leaders on both sides. If there's a church mission or a synagogue mission to the Holy Land, make sure that you visit both sides. And encourage your family, your friends, to learn about the other side. One thing I always recommend to people, if you're connected to one side, then read memoirs from the other side. Read about human life on the other side. If you're learning Hebrew, learn Arabic. Reach out to people of different ethnicities and religions. And let's close. Can I close? Or if you came here today as a strong supporter of Palestine, we hope you leave as a strong supporter of Palestine. And you came here today as a strong supporter of Israel. We hope you leave as a strong supporter of Israel. But the thing is not to leave as a strong supporter of one side at the expense of the other side. Because if Israel does not get what it needs, wants, and deserves, Palestine will not get what it needs, wants, and deserves. And if the Palestinians don't get what they need, want, and deserve, the Israelis won't get what they need, want, and deserve. And therefore, our message is pro-Palestine and pro-Israel at the same time. That's really the only way to be pro a better future for both sides. Thank you.